What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Reformed Reader, the channel where we review different forms of media through the lens of a Christian who is under the authority of the scriptures. My name is Josh, and today we're going to be doing a book review of The Terminal List by Jack Carr. Now, before we jump into the review, let's go over what is this book about. On his last combat deployment, Lieutenant Commander James Reese's entire team was killed in a catastrophic ambush. But when those dearest to him are murdered on the day of his homecoming, Reese discovers that this was not an act of war by a foreign enemy, but a conspiracy that runs to the highest levels of government. Now, with no family and free from the military's command structure, Reese applies the lessons that he learned in over a decade of constant warfare toward avenging the deaths of his family and teammates. With breathless pacing and relentless suspense, Reese ruthlessly targets his enemies in the upper echelons of power without regard for the laws of combat or the rule of law. Okay, guys, so the way that I normally structure my reviews is I go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good being the things about the book that I enjoyed, the bad being the things that I didn't care so much for, and these are preferential things, maybe a character I didn't like, or the writing style, or even the pacing of the book. But then I go into the ugly, which is what could be some sin that is steeped into this work that might hold a Christian back from picking it up, and I rate them out of 10. But before we get into that, let's first jump into the good. So what were some things about this book that I enjoyed? Man, the pacing. The pacing really is that breakneck speed. It is super fast-paced. On top of that, James Reese is a really cool, interesting character. He has a really interesting background, but we don't delve too far into it, so there's actually room for more for the future books in the series, which I really enjoy. But one of the main reasons why I enjoy James Reese's character is because he's sort of an average Joe. Now, you might be thinking, well, I wouldn't call a Navy SEAL an average Joe. And that's not what I mean. What I mean is he's a family guy. He's a guy that just wants to do his work. He wants to come home, love his wife well, and be a good father to his children. And the United States government takes that from him. They remove that opportunity, which is the sort of the thing in his life that is keeping him grounded and level-headed. It's what he knows is constant and that he can come back to. And once those things go out the window, all bets are off. So James Reese is a really cool character. The settings are really interesting. And the reason I say settings is because we kind of jump all over the place. Now, I will say, if you read the first chapter of this book and you're not hooked, it's probably not going to be for you. But if you read the first chapter of this book and you're really digging it, yeah, I think you're absolutely going to love this. So if you're kind of on the fence, like, should I or shouldn't I, read the first chapter and then decide for yourself, because that first chapter, it is a good window for us to peer into as far as what the whole book has to offer for us. And I think it's a good representation of what is in store going forward. And the plot, of course, is excellent. But one of the things that I enjoyed the most is the execution of his plan. There's little things that we wouldn't think of. There's little things that he does, like spraying WD-40 in door hinges prior to actually breaking in somewhere. He might infiltrate the place a day or two before and spray WD-40 in the hinges to keep them from squeaking when he does actually infiltrate, when his enemy or his target is at home. Those things I thought were excellent, because Jack Carr was intentional about mentioning those things while telling the story, and you knew it mattered, but you didn't know why. But once you found out why, then it really mattered, and it tied everything together really nicely. Did he have to include that stuff? No, but those little touches are what really catapulted this story from being just like, it was a pretty good read, to being a very good read. So this brings me to the bad. What were some things about this book that I didn't enjoy? It did have some pacing issues. I know I talked about how much I enjoyed the pacing, but there were some times where the story kind of lulled at times, and those parts, while I'm not saying it just needs to be go, go, go all the time, but those times did linger a bit. So the first chapter, you're really hooked. And then the next couple of chapters is sort of setting up the story, which I understand, but it does slow down. And once it speeds back up, it really does. But then it's almost like we just pulled the e-brake about the 40% mark. And so from about the 40 to 50% mark, it really slows down, just sort of setting things up. And that seems to be sort of the trajectory of the story, it has that sort of roller coaster pacing, meaning that there are times when you're in the valley and he's doing all the setup work in order to execute a target that definitely makes sense and it is necessary. I just think maybe we stay there a little longer than I would prefer. But then right after all of that setup, then you do reach that peak where his plan does unfold. And so there's little things like the Islamic leader. That discussion, I think, was drawn out too far. And, I'm going to try to remain as spoiler-free as possible. But for those of you who have read it, that conversation that took place in his office, I think just went on a little long because James Reese, he started leaning into this alias that he was using and going into his backstory when really it didn't matter because just a few pages later, all of that went out the window.
We jumped out a window.
No. So, in my opinion, I think the pacing could have been helped out a little bit if we maybe just would have skimmed over that, or if we just kind of would have jumped straight into what was actually taking place in the office. So what I mean is, like, instead of sitting down and going over, this is why I'm here and this is who I represent and blah, 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 blah. And then he goes on the offensive, as if instead, once the door closed and his target had a seat, if we then initiated contact, so to speak. So I just think those little things could have been tightened up a little bit. It wasn't bad by any means. I've read far worse books, but I do think that it could have been tightened up some. And everything else that I didn't care for, preferentially, I'm just going to say, let's just jump straight into The Ugly. So for those of you who are new to the channel, I break down The Ugly into 5 sections and rate them out of 10, starting with violence and brutality. Now for violence and brutality, I'm going to give this an 8.5. It's pretty high. The violence is ramped up big time. There are a couple of scenes where it's really, really brutal. And for a good reason. So, I don't think it's gratuitous. I don't think that he's just throwing it in there for the shock factor or anything. I think it's just real. He goes into some details that are a bit gory that I definitely think are heavy. So if you want to know what kind of to expect, I would say maybe the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan. That's the sort of violence and brutality I think you can expect here. But instead of it being on a mass scale, it's kind of one-on-one, tends to focus just on James Reese and maybe another character or two, but not usually more than just a few people. So, think Saving Private Ryan, but on a smaller scale. So it's pretty high. So this leads me into category 2, which is sexually explicit content. Now for sexually explicit content, I'm going to give this an 8. It's pretty high as well. However, for 95% of the book, it's non-existent. But there's one scene down in Mexico where if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read the book, there is a particular scene where James Reese is infiltrating a gang member's hideout, and they have hired some ladies of the oldest profession. And I'm trying to be as delicate as possible. There are some descriptors. There are too many descriptors, in my opinion. I definitely think you could have told the story without it. I do not think that it was necessary. Again, do I think that it was realistic? Sure. I think that it was a realistic instance. I think that these things actually occur. I think that these individuals actually take advantage of these women. All of those things. However, I didn't prefer it. I found myself skipping over, a paragraph or two. It was just too much. It was very sexually explicit. So, there's at least one, if not two, hardcore sex scenes in this one chapter. So just, be forewarned, they're in there. And like I said, it definitely goes into some graphic detail, at least as far as my taste go. So yeah, I'm going to give it an 8 because it's pretty high. So category 3 is language. And for language, I'm going to give this a 7. Yeah, some high language. Again, this is sort of that military espionage, military thriller type of novel. So you kind of know what to expect going into it. Yeah, there's going to be some heavy language. You're dealing with the military. They're not really concerned about propriety or about manners. So the language is going to be pretty heavy, pretty intense, and it's scattered throughout the book. Obviously, when tensions are high, the language is ramped up, but it is still there kind of throughout the book. So again, just be forewarned, it does have some of the heavy hitters. One in particular, they really like to use. Again, Saving Private Ryan is probably a pretty good reference point. So, if the language in Saving Private Ryan was too heavy for you, this is probably going to be too heavy for you as well. So category 4 is Gratuitous Inclusions. And for Gratuitous Inclusions, I'm going to give this a 1. And the reason I'm going to give it a 1 is because I don't remember there being anything, but I will say, and have said it before, that I don't want to be preached at or virtue signaled to one way or the other. I don't want to be reading a book and be reading about how I ought to be inclusive to all lifestyles. In the same vein, I also don't want to be preached at about how that is just absolutely abhorrent all the time. Again, I read for entertainment and sometimes education, but when I'm reading for education, I'm reading educational books. I'm reading history books. I'm reading theology or those kind of things. But when I'm reading for entertainment, can I glean some things intellectually from these books? Sure. But I will say that for anybody on the far left, that they're going to hate this book. Number one, because they're going to find a reason to hate it. And number two, because Jack Carr gives them a reason to. All of the bad guys were Democrats. Some of the bad guys were Islamic terrorists. Again, I'm not trashing this book. I'm just letting you know that there were a couple of times where I think maybe Jack Carr leaned a little heavy-handed with saying like Democrat bad. And while I may or may not agree with that sentiment in a broad sense, I don't want us taking jabs at each other one way or the other. So I'm going to give it a 1. It's probably a 0, but I will say for anybody that maybe doesn't hold to the same worldview as I do, you're probably not going to enjoy this. And so the final category is dark themes. Now for dark themes, I also include heavy themes. So these are the things that maybe weigh on your conscience when you read them. And I'm going to give this a 7 as well. And in large part, it's because you're dealing with a lot of murder and the main character is trying to rationalize murder. It's vengeance. It is just hardcore vengeance, untethered vengeance against these people. There can be some things that are pretty heavy in this book. There are some pretty heavy topics. Some pretty heavy things happen to the innocent. And you learn the mindset of some of these SEALs. Sometimes collateral damage happens and, is what it is. That's sort of the mindset as far as James Reese goes. It's like, well, yes, there's some insurgents here. And, if I accidentally shoot through the wall and kill his kids, then I guess that's what's going to happen. I'm like, yeah, I'm not completely on board there. Again, this is not a happy-go-lucky book. This is a book about vengeance that has been militarized. So this leads me to the final question, which is, would I recommend it to a Christian? And the answer is, it really depends. I would not recommend this to most women. I think this book was definitely written for men. Not saying that women can't enjoy it, but this was written for men. I think this was written for some bros. So I definitely think that guys that love explosions and action movies and those kinds of things, I think you'll probably really enjoy this. I think for those who really enjoy Saving Private Ryan, but you're looking for something that's a little more modernized, or maybe you liked American Sniper or Lone Survivor. If you like those movies, I think you'll really, really enjoy this. If you like some of the Jack Ryan movies, yeah, I think you'll enjoy this. But it leans to the heavier side of things. So would I recommend this to a Christian? I would say it just depends. I'd have to kind of get to know you a little bit. I'd have to go through what are your likes and dislikes, what are some things that are a turn off to you as far as your reading preferences, and kind of go from there. Because this is a pretty heavy book. With that being said, though, for those people that like this book, I think they're really going to like it, and they're really going to enjoy reading the other books in the series. But overall, guys, I really enjoyed this book. I did really enjoy it. I know that my ratings were pretty high, and you're like, well, how can your ratings on these things be so turned up and you still enjoy it? Because a lot of that was few and far between, and at no point was my conscience convicted about reading this. So I really enjoyed it, and I plan to read some of his other books. Now, if those things ramp up in the other books, yeah, maybe this isn't going to be the series for me, but it's worth giving a shot because I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it an 8 out of 10 or 4 stars on Goodreads. So overall, I really enjoyed it, and I think for those people that love those military action movies, I think you'll enjoy this as well. So thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me and listening to me ramble about the Terminal List for a little bit. Guys, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. But more than anything, please share these videos to your Christian brothers and sisters, because it is my goal with this channel to be a good resource to my brothers and sisters in Christ, so that maybe we can spend our time, money, and energy a little more wisely on things that honor the Lord. So thank you guys so much again for watching, and I will see you on the next one.